Alright, welcome back to the SuperCoach NRL channel. In this video, we're going to look at the third part of our preseason series. This time focusing on the cheapie or more value options in NRL SuperCoach for season 2024. So with this, we're looking at players from basically 400k down to 204, I think is the base price this year. Again, there will be an exception or two here or there, but we'll get stuck straight into it because you can see I've already filled the team out. Plenty of budget left, which made it nice and easy. But as usual, we'll start at hooker. And so I think, the best value option or cheapie option this season in the hooker position is Jaden Brayley. Formerly an 80-minute hooker, with Phoenix Crossland being so successful, you'd imagine that there's going to be a bit more of a 60-20 sort of split, but Jaden Brayley will play the 60. So playing 60 minutes, should average about 50 points. And if we just use the pricing here as an example, you can imagine 50 points will get you to about 500k as an average. So Jaden Brayley, will make 170k based on that. So I think, he is definitely the number one cheap option that I'm looking at starting this season. And I think, there's quite a few teams that have got him on the bench to kick off 2024. The other option that I'm tossing up there, just because there's not a lot of great options, I don't think. Just looking through the list, unless there's an injury here or there. But Connor Watson. So speaking of injuries, has come back from a serious one. Again, one of those players is a bit too versatile for his own good. But there is an argument to see him playing a bit of 13, potentially even a bit of hooker with Brandon Smith probably being the only recognised hooker in the squad. They might play Sandon Smith off the bench, so they might play Watson purely as a middle forward. Could be a bit more just, utility all over the place, which obviously would impact his scoring. But I guess in terms of job security, he's probably the most likely, I would imagine. Just, I guess, a couple other honourable mentions, I suppose. Just where's the 400 start? So maybe not Mitch Kenny. The Raiders guys share the workload pretty evenly. Same with the Eels. Freddie Lussick shares with Wade Egan. I mean, if Reed Marnie went down, then Jake Turpin would provide really good value at 293. Same deal with Appy Coruscant. Would see some more time for Jake Simpkin. If something happened to Billy Walters, then maybe Corey Pakes could push for a bit more time. But there is also Tyson Smoothie there as well, so probably not. Mamazoulis, if something did happen to Damien Cook, would definitely present some value, but Cook's one of the most durable players going around. Chan Kum Tong, they're talking about getting him some more game time, but you'd imagine Lachlan Croker is still the main man at the Seagulls. Carl Lawton could find his way onto an edge, but has had a lot of issues with injury. And Jaden Beryl's one people like to get on in the hopes that he might start getting some minutes off Blake Brayley, or that Blake gets injured, but hasn't really happened yet. So if it does, obviously, I think everyone would be on Jaden Beryl. In the front row, again, another position with not a lot of value. I have already talked about this in the preseason, and I guess trying to justify loading up on front rowers is that there's just not a great deal of value. But I think the two most likely options are Spencer Leniu and Fletcher Baker. And probably out of those, probably Fletcher Baker would be number one. Assuming he gets the starting spot where Tom Flegler's vacated. There is an argument for another guy in this video to get the start, but it would involve Pat Carrigan probably giving up the 13 jumper. So for that reason, I think Baker's the front runner and could present a bit of value. And Spencer Leniu moving to the Roosters. I guess if you're moving away from the three-time premiers, um, it's partly got to be for money, but you'd also imagine that there'd have to be more minutes on offer because he's really just played that explosive front row forward off the bench for Penrith. But he probably is capable of more. Probably wants to be capable of more. So he could get that chance at the Roosters. They've got a somewhat aging pack. Um, so a player like Spencer Leniu could be just what they need. Chris Patolo from the Bulldogs. I've probably said this on the channel too many times already, but the Bulldogs really struggle in the middle. And Patolo was just unfortunate with injuries and stuff last year. But he's one they have earmarked as being, part of their future middle rotation. So if he can get some, fitness and some game time at 240k, he could present a bit of cheap value. And Viliami Fafita, so bottom dollar dual position rookie from the Dragons. Um, they traded Aaron Woods for him last season. Um, so I guess Manly were looking for a bit more experience in their pack. Um, and I guess they specifically targeted this guy as part of the trade. Um, so, if he can make that sort of jump up to first grade this year, anyone with bottom dollar dual position is definitely someone we would consider in our teams when that comes up. So on to the second row, and the first two there are the two English imports, Morgan Smithies and Kai Pierce-Paul. So I guess there's a little bit of question mark around their job security. They probably do have to prove themselves at the Raiders and Knights respectively. But Morgan Smithies profiles a lot like John Bateman, and given Ricky Stewart's success of integrating the English imports over the years, he is definitely one that I'm considering getting on. Pierce-Paul, it probably just depends on round one team and whether it's him or Dylan Lucas named on the edge. I think they're both sort of playing for the one spot. If they're on the bench, they'll be that edge utility, which isn't the best position for SuperCoach. So they do need to be starting to be considered. But Pierce-Paul at 345 does present a lot more value than Lucas, even though Lucas does provide centre wing dual flexibility. The next one on our list, and this is where we start really speculating, but Jamin Salmon at the Bulldogs. Um, the talk is that he's come to the club as a second rower. He is a bit of a utility type player, can play any position you put him in. But yeah, a bit of talk about him being considered as an edge forward. Probably stuck behind Preston and Kickout at the moment. But if one of those two were to go down, sounds like he's the next man up. And at 317k, that's a pretty good value for a starting edge forward that will in all likelihood play 80 minutes. Tallis Duncan from the Rabbitohs, I've got on the list. So debuted last year and looked pretty good. Um, I guess, Souths are a pretty established team. But if you look on their edges, they've got Kaloa Matangi on one edge, who's, nailed on, won't be replaced. But then on the other edge, they've rolled through Cheekham, Jacob Host, Jai Arrow even gets some run out on that edge. Um, so, it's probably a bit the position that is up for grabs in the side. Um, so if he can continue his development and get that starting spot, at 320k, I definitely would be having him in my team. Kobe Hetherington from the Broncos. So this was the player I was alluding to before when I talked about Fletcher Baker. Um, if he was to get the starting 13 spot, as I said, they move Carrigan to the front row. Then Hetherington would present excellent value because he's a good worker. Will tackle, run the ball, all that good stuff. More likely he'll come off the bench and play in the middle rotation. So there is a little bit of value there, but I guess that's a position he was playing last year and he's priced at 300k essentially. So I think he needs to start to be considered. And Ben Travojevic is the last one. So, a bit of a recurring theme with a few of these players that The reason why they're so cheap is they're probably too versatile for their own good. So they sort of get stuck on the bench and can cover wherever. But I know with Manly there's a potential centre spot open or spot in the back line, but could be centre. Could be a second row spot open if Josh Schuster doesn't fire up and get the job done. And I think, Ben Travojevic, if he can get a starting spot, is awesome value. You know, look at his brothers and how successful they are at the grade. There's no reason why he couldn't be as successful. He just needs to get a starting spot. So at 277k dual position, it would be nice if he was getting the minutes, but it's a big if. Into the halves, and so I guess the best or most reliable halfback cheapie option would be Aiden Caesar at the West Tigers. So he's just going to slot right in where Luke Brooks left. He kicks goals. He's experienced at the NRL level. Went over to Super League. And we've seen from players that go over to the Super League and then come back, like Jackson Hastings. Trying to think, there was an Albert Kelly, maybe not so much for the purpose of this. But they generally come back with a more well-rounded game because they do get a bit more opportunity to dominate over there. So it'd be very interesting to see Aiden Caesar this year, I think. And one I've got in my preseason team, and not really making big plans to try and find alternatives. But one that could pique my interest if he does get a spot is Harris Tavita at the Warriors. So he's had a couple of years off, wanted to get away from football, which is fair enough, all respect to him. But yeah, if he can come back in and pick up where he left off, he presents fantastic value at 240k. Obviously, you've got Metcalf, you've got not Volkman, he's going to the Dragons, isn't he? There's another one at the Warriors. Let's have a look. Warriors, what Metcalf I said, Dylan Walker's a utility. Tamari Martin, that's the one. So, there's a bit of a three-way battle there for the 5'8" spot. But, based on, I guess, pure talent, Harris Tavita has those other guys covered, as talented as they are. But he may have to work his way back into it. So definitely one, if he gets a run, there'll be a lot of people bring him in because there's just built-in value in that price. Onto the 5'8" position now, and Kyle Flanagan is the pick of the cheapies, I suppose. Obviously, sort of hasn't done too much since he left Cronulla, but as I said previously, at Cronulla, playing his best football. Who was the coach? His dad, Shane. He's gone to the Dragons. Who's the coach? Shane Flanagan. So, for that reason, I see, he can return back to his best. And, his price has that built-in value because he was coming off the bench for the Dogs, playing like 15, 20 minutes last year at most. So there's definitely money to be made with Kyle Flanagan. Even if you don't want to start him, you've got Caesar who can play 5'8". You've got the mid-price options. You may even want to go a keeper at 5'8". But yeah, if you just want a cheap option that's going to tick over and make some money on the bench, yeah, Flanagan I think is your guy. And then I guess the more out there option is Fainu from the Tigers. So I think the chat is he's the long-term option in the halves. So whether they choose to blood him a bit like Isaiah Katoa last year and throw him in the deep end essentially and see if he'll sink or swim is one way they could go about it. Whether they, just wait until, the season gets in and natural attrition through injuries, suspension occurs and get him in that way. Yeah, whether they just keep trying to develop him in reserve grade. He is only super young. Remains to be seen. But, any bottom dollar player that there's a bit of hype about, he'll appear in a few teams pre-season, no doubt. So onto the centre wing. And the first option I've got here, and I guess with a lot of these options, as we've said, it is team dependent. But Drew Hutchinson. So depending on who you talk to and lists that you see, A few people have him as the starting seven for the Dogs. Um, he's definitely a steady hand in the halves, but I think his utility value is going to probably mean he ends up on the bench. Um, they brought Toby Sexton in, and I talked about him in the mid price, video, and I think he is, the one that they could definitely use this season. Whether he's a long term option at halfback, who knows? But I think he's good enough that he can be an NRL halfback. But Drew Hutchison definitely provides that experience and that sort of thing that the Dogs are looking for. Whether he needs to be in the 7 jersey to provide that, I don't know. If even maybe he starts at 6 and they move Burton to the centres, which there's some talk, but I think that's an even worse idea. Burton is an NRL 5'8", definitely a rep centre, no doubt about that. But you know, for NRL, he's absolutely one of the better halves in the competition. Um, Xavier Savage, so I've got him on the list. If he could crack the fullback spot at the Raiders, there is a few spots in the back line up for grabs. There's a couple of spots being made available with Croker retiring, um, Whiten moving to the Rabbitohs. So I think Savage is definitely in the conversation for that. I think he'd only be super coach relevant if he was playing at fullback. The Raiders wingers traditionally don't do too much. Like Rapana has been a good scorer in the past, but I know Kotrich, for example, is very ordinary. Albert Hopewadi, not much better. Um, so I know if I was the Raiders coach, I'd probably have a serious think about the next generation. They've got a few options, which you can probably see on screen. We'll get to them eventually. And yeah, I think definitely part of that could be Xavier Savage. Bronson Sherry at the Bulldogs, if he can get a centre spot, I think he presents good value. Was doing it in the past until obviously the drug issue, um, but he'll have a point to prove. Uh, there's just a lot of options at the Bulldogs now. They've got Stephen Crichton, Connor Tracy could play there. There's talk about Matt Burton playing the centres. There's talk about Jacob Kiraz staying in the centres so Blake Wilson can continue on the wing. Um, but I think if it was me picking the team, it'd probably be Tracy and Crichton. I guess the reason for that probably clear a bit lower in this video too. But um, yeah, I mean, if Sherry starts, then you've got to consider him. Whailungo, so I think a lot of people have got him already in the team with the hope that Pappenhausen isn't up for the start of the season and they just slot Whailungo at the back until, Pappenhausen's good to go. But even not, he could find his way into the centres. He's shown in his, one game of NRL plus his internationals for Samoa that he's definitely capable of it. It's just whenever Bellyache's ready to pull the trigger. So, yeah, I think an option a lot of people are considering. Jesse McLean from the Panthers. So I don't think he's in their best 17, but they always seem to end up with an injury here or there at the Panthers, and it's just next man up. And as far as I can read, he probably is next man up, um, particularly if it's like a winger that goes down. Um, but anywhere in the back five, I think he can slot in and do a job. So one to put on the watch list, maybe even if he doesn't start round one. Probably the sort of best cheapie in the traditional sense that looks like it's going to get a Guernsey round one is Ethan Strange. So could play 5'8", could play centre. I think for what we're looking at, if he can get a spot at centre, would be perfect. Particularly if the other pieces fall in place the way we want with Savage and Weeks. But yeah, I think another one that's going to be super popular. And Aramea from the Storm, again, probably not in their best 17, but I think, if one of the wingers, Warbrick or Coates goes down, he could be next man up in that sense. So on the wing. So missed last year, I think, through injury, but has done it in the past and definitely could do it again. Finally, the fullbacks. So probably the more secure option is actually KO Weeks. It sounds like he's going to get a start, probably at 5'8", but could also play fullback. As I said, ideally to be Savage fullback, Strange centre, Weeks wing. 5'8", and we could load up on all three and just happy days on the Raiders. But yeah, it sounds like out of the three, he's the one who's most likely to benefit from the moves that have been made off season, and the front runner for the sixth jersey. And Blake Taff I've put in again. This is probably just personal preference because it sounds like Connor Tracy's going to get the fullback spot. But if I was the coach of the Dogs, um, this would be my fullback, Blake Taff. He's shown when he's filled in for Latrell that he's an NRL quality fullback. Again, probably just a bit too versatile for his own good. He can play in the halves as well. So, just sits on the bench and comes on and does what he needs to do, does it well. Um, so I guess maybe in a sort of fantasy type world, he could be in the halves perhaps. So you could have him, you could have Connor Tracy, you could have Bronson Sherry, all sort of playing in that sense. Stephen Crichton will probably play centre. Still, I guess it'll mean Toby Sexton will miss out. So yeah, the Bulldogs is one of those ones. There's going to be some value. It's just where's it going to pop up from, I suppose. But yeah, that's I guess my thoughts on the best cheaper or value options going around at the moment. Obviously, we've still got all the preseason to go, round one team lists, all that. So don't get too caught up in it. But just players to keep an eye on and monitor those sorts of things and see how many we can end up with in our team. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts or any other cheapies that I've missed that you think are gonna have a good season, let me know in the comments section. Um, like the video if you do enjoy the NRL content. Subscribe for all the fantasy content. And other than that, we'll catch you in the next one.